Well, 9 years ago, I asked the question on Twitter, if Trump gets dementia, how will we know? Donald Trump makes a public dementia diagnosis difficult because he is a pathological liar, having been caught telling over 30,000 lies in his first 4 years of the presidency. He's also the most ignorant person in the history of the American presidency and usually operates at a level of public stupidity never seen in American political history. And so if you mix or together pathological lying with ignorance and relentless stupidity, you will sound like you are in neurological decline all the time, even if you're not. When you throw in a 79-year-old brain, then dementia is one of the very first things you think of when you see Donald Trump on Friday get up from his chair in the middle of a White House meeting with oil executives to turn away from everyone in the room and gaze out a window which he imagined to be the entrance to a building that does not exist, and then stand in that window talking to himself about what isn't outside that window.
I got to look at this myself. Wow. What a view. This is the door to the ballroom. What did you... Unusual time to look.
No, it's not the door to the ballroom. But he is right that it is an unusual time to look at his imaginary ballroom. And so everyone who has seen that, including the oil executives who were in that room, are left to wonder, is that dementia or is that just Trump? That's the person who was trying to convince the oil industry executives to rush down to Venezuela and start taking Venezuelan oil, and he convinced none of them to do that. And the evidence of Trump dementia during the meeting probably convinced most or all of them that Donald Trump can't be believed about anything.
You'll make it back one way or the other. You're all going to do very well. I think really very well. Marco just gave me a note. Go back to Chevron. They want to discuss something. Go ahead. I'm going back to Chevron, Marco. Thank you, Marco.
Was there a question, Mr. President?
Yes, go ahead, Marco. What are you saying here?
Is that dementia or is that just Trump? Imagine what the White House press corps would have done with that if Joe Biden had done either one of those things that you just saw Donald Trump do. Donald Trump went to Detroit today to lie to the audience of rich people at the Detroit Economic Club, telling them that prices are down after a year of inflation holding steady thanks to Donald Trump's tariffs and Donald Trump's other economic mismanagement. And so I think we can assume his lie about inflation to an audience that...
Just before President Trump took the stage at the Detroit Economic Club today, where he gave a speech touting his economic policies, insisting that affordability was a, quote, fake word invented by Democrats. Quite a message for a speech. There you go. Just before Trump gave that banger of a speech, the New York Times published this. Initial Obamacare enrollment drops by 1.4 million. Now, the word initial is key in there because that number is expected to get worse, not better. You see that 1.4 million number, the number of Americans who made the brutal decision to forego health care coverage after their premium costs skyrocketed, literally doubling on average after Trump and Republicans refused to extend health care subsidies last year. That 1.4 million number is made up of people who are well informed enough to have preemptively opted out of their new higher premiums. Lots of ACA enrollees have plans that automatically renew, and those people have not gotten their first bill yet. They may not know how much higher their new premium is. And when those people get their first bill and the sticker shock hits, which it will, the amount of Americans Trump and Republicans will have effectively just priced out of health insurance is expected to rise. Now, who could have predicted that? Well, just about everyone predicted that. We talked about it a lot on this show. You know why? Because policy experts and Democrats and all sorts of people out there were jumping up and down shouting about it for months last year. But Republicans in Congress allowed health care subsidies to lapse anyway. Now, today at his speech to the Detroit Economic Club, Trump turned to something else he wants to get rid of: Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. As Trump put it today, quote, "That jerk will be gone soon." Graceful as always. Now, the Federal Reserve is independent, and Trump can't actually unilaterally get rid of Powell, but the Justice Department has now opened a criminal investigation into Powell, seemingly trying to intimidate him out of the position. All because Trump is upset that Powell is refusing to change interest rates willy-nilly at Trump's command. Again, they're independent. Now, again, we find ourselves in a position where economists and policy experts, leaders on Wall Street, and Democrats, who don't often agree on all that much, are jumping up and down and warning about just how catastrophic for our economy it would be if Trump destroyed the independence of the Fed and politicized interest rates. But Trump seems to be angling for just that. For him, I guess, it's full steam ahead, no matter what. Joining me now to talk about all of this is Senator Elizabeth Warren. She's the ranking Democrat on the Senate Banking Committee. Wow, lots to discuss. First, I read this headline this morning and about what Jamie Dimon said, and I thought Senator Elizabeth Warren might agree with this. He basically warned that if Trump tries to mess with the independent.
And a lot of the people that have resigned in the last 24 hours, it's the head of the criminal division of the Civil Rights Division. Those are those who prosecute civil rights violations, including by police officers. Some of very experienced, like you said, Mr. Thompson, very experienced prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota. Those in those positions are the ones who I think really you're talking about, right? Because they are in the positions where they're high enough level, they have enough experience, they know what they're being asked to do is wrong, and to stay in these situations, at some point it's probably going to come for them. I'm not going to say the same thing about lower level rank and file. You know, there's 93 U.S. Attorney's Office. There's certainly been pressure on a number of them, but there are still many that I think are probably effectively prosecuting the kinds of crimes that we would expect federal prosecutors to prosecute, and we do need that. But that's different than, but when you are asked, and if you are asked, everyone should have a piece of paper in their desk with their resignation, because if they are asked to do something that they think is either, unjustified, immoral, unethical, not supported by the evidence, they need to be ready to say no.
Right. Yeah, so much to say about this. I will start by noting that I talked to a former pretty senior person in that office today who told me that the office is shaken in Minnesota and that there yet may still be additional resignations. So I'll start there. I would note here, though, that
crews on the scene say agents surged into the area with at least 15 different large SUVs. As agents returned to their vehicles, flashbangs were also fired at the crowd of protesters. Some protesters seen throwing snowballs at agents. This is, of course, Minnesota in January. Around 1,000 more U.S. Customs and Border Protection agents are expected to deploy to Minneapolis. That's on top of 2,000 federal agents deployed to the area already. In a long Truth Social post earlier today, President Trump defended ICE agents, writing, quote, "Fear not, great people of Minnesota, the day of reckoning and retribution is coming."
Their investigation, not on the actions of the officer, not on the actions of Renee Good at the scene of the fatal shooting, but rather on the widow of the deceased, that is indefensible. First of all, whatever the widow of Renee Good may have done, what her associations may have been, is completely and totally irrelevant to the question of whether this was a justified legal self-defense shooting by the ICE officer. Second of all, prosecutors get leads on cases from all different places. Sometimes a cooperator or an informant will give you leads. Sometimes you'll read a story in the newspaper. But to get a lead based on a person who was fatally shot and say, now let's look at that person's widow.
Today, we will explore how economic pressure, cooperation, and communication interact within a highly connected global environment. This discussion is not about specific governments or events. Instead, it focuses on broader patterns that influence markets, institutions, and long-term stability across many systems. In a world where trade and cooperation are deeply interconnected, decisions made in one place often have consequences far beyond their original scope. Understanding these dynamics helps explain why economic actions are often debated not only for their immediate impact, but also for their long-term effects on trust and collaboration. Let's begin by looking at why economic measures attract so much attention. Economic measures are often used as tools to influence behavior or signal disagreement. They can affect pricing, access, and decision-making across multiple sectors. Because modern markets are interdependent, these measures rarely remain confined to a single area. Instead, they influence supply chains, investment confidence, and consumer expectations across a wide network of participants. This interconnectedness means that economic pressure does not operate in isolation. When restrictions or additional costs are introduced, businesses often reassess their strategies. They may adjust sourcing, reconsider partnerships, or delay expansion plans until conditions become clearer. These responses are typically cautious rather than dramatic, reflecting a desire to preserve flexibility in uncertain environments. From an institutional perspective, economic measures raise questions about fairness and consistency. Many organizations emphasize the importance of predictable rules and shared frameworks. When actions are perceived as unilateral or inconsistent, confidence in these frameworks can weaken. This does not necessarily lead to immediate disruption, but it can gradually erode trust, making cooperation more difficult over time. Trust plays a central role in economic stability. Markets function efficiently when participants believe that rules are clear and applied consistently. When trust declines, uncertainty increases. Businesses may become more risk-averse, investment may slow, and innovation may be postponed. This is why communication matters so much. Clear explanations about why decisions are made, how they will be implemented, and what criteria are being used can help reduce uncertainty. Even when disagreement exists, transparency allows participants to plan and adapt more effectively. Without clear communication, speculation often fills the gap. Speculation can amplify concern and lead to reactions that extend beyond what conditions require. This can create feedback loops where uncertainty generates further uncertainty, making stabilization more difficult. Another important factor is proportionality. Economic measures are often evaluated not only by their intent, but by their scope and impact. When actions are seen as disproportionate, they may prompt broader concern about precedent and future application. This concern can influence behavior well beyond the original context. Long-term systems depend on balance. They require mechanisms that allow disagreement without undermining cooperation entirely. Economic relationships are rarely static. They evolve through negotiation, adjustment, and compromise. Tools that limit flexibility can reduce the space for these processes to operate effectively. From a broader perspective, economic pressure highlights the tension between influence and collaboration. Influence seeks to shape outcomes, while collaboration seeks to align interests. Sustainable systems often rely more heavily on the latter. While pressure may produce short-term results, collaboration tends to support long-term stability by building shared understanding and mutual benefit. This does not mean that disagreements disappear. Rather, they are managed through processes that prioritize dialogue, predictability, and respect for established norms. These processes allow systems to absorb tension without fracturing. Another key concept is spillover effect. Because markets are interconnected, actions taken in one area can influence unrelated sectors. Increased costs may be passed along supply chains, affecting consumers and smaller businesses that were not part of the original decision. These indirect effects can accumulate, shaping broader economic conditions over time. This is why some observers emphasize restraint. Restraint does not imply inaction. It implies careful consideration of second-order effects. Decisions made with an awareness of interconnected consequences are more likely to support stability. Adaptability also plays a role. Organizations that can adjust to changing conditions tend to fare better over time. Diversified partnerships, flexible planning, and ongoing evaluation allow systems to respond without excessive disruption. However, adaptability works best within stable frameworks. When underlying rules are predictable, adaptation becomes strategic rather than reactive. When rules feel uncertain, adaptation may turn defensive, reducing efficiency and confidence. Over time, prolonged economic tension can shape behavior in subtle ways. Participants may become cautious, reducing engagement even when opportunities exist. This cautiousness can slow growth and innovation, reinforcing a cycle of uncertainty. Breaking this cycle often requires renewed emphasis on dialogue and cooperation. Communication channels that remain open allow differences to be addressed incrementally rather than escalating. Even limited engagement can clarify intentions and reduce misunderstanding. From a systems perspective, long-term stability is built gradually. It emerges from consistent practices, transparent processes, and mutual adjustment. Sudden or sweeping actions may attract attention, but sustainable progress usually comes from steady, coordinated effort. This principle applies across many domains. Whether in economic coordination, organizational leadership, or institutional governance, stability depends on aligning incentives with shared expectations. When alignment weakens, uncertainty grows. When alignment strengthens, resilience follows. In closing, economic measures are powerful tools, but their effectiveness depends on how they are used and understood. In a connected world, actions rarely affect only one area. They influence confidence, cooperation, and long-term relationships. By prioritizing clarity, proportionality, and dialogue, systems can manage disagreement without undermining stability. This balanced approach supports resilience, allowing cooperation to continue even when perspectives differ. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your time.